The year I was born, no one could have imagined I would be remembered for infamy. That year, there were no omens. No one prophesied, and no one gave me a second glance.
My name is Jinlian. My name is known in every household across China, and it is known as an utterly evil one. It has been written into textbooks, hung upon opera stages, used as a warning or as casual mockery. The moment it is mentioned, no explanation is needed. Promiscuous, cruel, a husband killer. As if these words were destined to be carved onto me from birth. But have you ever stopped to think? How many times must a name be repeated before it completely replaces a human being? After that, no one cared who I really was. No one asked, where did she come from? What kind of life did she live? Did she ever have a choice? They only needed this name to contain their anger, to project their fear, to prove that she deserved it. And so, my name no longer belonged to me. It became a verdict, label, a conclusion that never needs re-examination. This is not a nickname, nor is it a sarcasm, let alone the derogatory term for a promiscuous woman used later. In the time when I was born, Jinlian was simply a common name for a woman. It was written in the family genealogy, written in the blessings of our elders, and had nothing to do with the harsh voices that would come later. I was born in the northern Song dynasty, near Qinghai County. It wasn't bustling, nor was it remote. There were markets, passing travelers, and everyday families that opened and closed their doors on time. In the early morning, you could hear vendors selling hot porridge at the street corners. In the evening, the smoke from cooking would rise in thin curls. The days were neither fast nor slow. My family wasn't wealthy, but we weren't destitute either. My mother taught me to spin thread, cook, and manage the household. My father taught me to speak less and mind my place. They didn't often preach morals, but they repeatedly told me, a woman should not cause trouble. I could spin thread, manage the household, and know my place. These were the essential skills every woman had to learn in that era. Qinghai County wasn't quiet in those days. Markets were held every 5 or 10 days, with vendors selling cloth, medicine, pancakes, and incense, set up early along the street. On the 15th day of the first month, lanterns would be hung in the streets. Not the glass lanterns of the palace, but paper lanterns with oil spots, swaying when the wind blew. Children ran after the lanterns. I too would stand at the street corner and watch the lanterns. Their shadows swayed in the river, one by one like broken pieces of the moon. At that time I never thought about reputation or good and evil. These words were far from me. I thought life would spin like a spool of thread, round and round, slowly turning. But life didn't give me many choices. Later I married. Before I married, I stayed at a household for some time. You later called him Zhang Dehu, but at the time, he was just a wealthy household in the county with some land and a few shops. I wasn't sold there. That description is too simple. It was through a relative's introduction, who said I should go help with some needlework, a way to earn a living. It wasn't just simple sewing, but a world of needles and silk threads. I sat in the courtyard, looking through the window at the sunlight spilling onto the cobblestone ground. With a fine needle in hand, I threaded colorful silk to embroider flowers, birds, lotus leaves, and auspicious patterns. Sometimes I embroidered pouches, sometimes tablecloths, each stitch carefully done, fearing the thread might tangle or the pattern stray. That household, with a deep courtyard, a large gate, and many rules. The courtyard was deep, and the servants at the gate walked back and forth, as if every stitch I made was magnified under their gaze. I kept my head down, fumbling with my work but too scared to speak. The air in the courtyard was filled with the scent of oiled paper lanterns, the smell of silk thread, and silent watchful eyes. But I slowly realized the rules were meant to be kept by the servants, and the gaze fell from above looking down on me. In those days, rumors began to spread. Some said I seduced others. Some said I was unruly. And some even said that was the stain on my destiny. But did you notice? In all the rumors, only I had a name. But Zhang Dehu was always just the wealthy man. He was never judged, never blamed, not even remembered. This became the prototype for all the stories that followed. Woman, carrying the weight of the entire narrative, while power retreated into the shadows. So later, when someone decided for me, saying I should be married off, I didn't resist. Not because of submission, but because I knew staying where I was would only result in more versions of my story being written. You call him Wu Dalong, but when I knew him he was called Wu Ji. This name at the time was not noteworthy. He was not the short and ugly man you imagine, living off selling pancakes mocked by everyone. He was a traveling merchant, always on the road, leaving before dawn, and returning late into the night. He was a man of few words, but not unkind. He didn't speak much, but he wasn't dismissive either. Between us, there were no conflicts like those you later wrote about. More often it was just silence. I married him not for love. In that era, what woman had the right to speak of love? On our wedding day there was no grand celebration, no tumultuous events. The fireworks were few, the feast modest. I entered the house and began living the wife's life as expected. Wake up, cook, wait for him, clean. The days passed, one after another. I accepted my fate and knew my place. After we married, I rarely left the house. Not because I didn't want to, but because there was no need. But whenever I did go out, I could feel the eyes slowing down, watching me. The market was as lively as ever, yet the footsteps seemed to avoid me. When I walked down the street, men would glance at me twice. Women would lower their heads, hurrying past or quickly avoiding me. Those gazes, without sound, made me feel like I had nowhere to stand. I did nothing, but rumors always moved faster than the truth. Later I heard someone say, "Someone like her will surely cause trouble sooner or later." That sentence was light, but it stayed in my heart for a long time. It was then that I slowly understood. A woman, simply because she is beautiful, is already condemned. Later on, another figure entered the story. Shimen Qing. It wasn't a name I remembered first. It was a name you repeated again and again. I must make this clear. In official historical records, there is no account of me committing adultery with Shimen Qing. In fact, there is no clear evidence in history that I ever even knew him. The Shimen Qing you know, is a symbol of power and desire created by later writers. Dressed in luxury, bending freely, he stands as the imagined source of all corruption. But he was not created for me. Rather, I was written into the story, to serve his existence. All the flirtation, the secret meetings, happened only in books, not in my real life. What truly sentenced me to death was the passing of my husband. It was nothing more than an ordinary illness, yet it became the greatest crime of my life. But I want to tell you the truth. Wu Ji died of illness. No arsenic, no poisoned wine, no conspiracy, just sickness dragging on day after day. When he fell ill, I cared for him. When he died, I mourned him. When he was buried, I fulfilled every rite. I did everything I was supposed to do. But later some people thought dying of illness was too ordinary to fit a compelling story. So the story needed a wicked woman. And so, I became the woman who murdered her husband. Then it was Wu Song's turn to enter the tale. His arrival felt like a predetermined ending. You admire his loyalty, his righteousness, his fierce sense of justice. But in the story, his justice could only be completed by stepping on me. So, I had to be lustful. I had to be poisonous. I had to die. Because, if a woman does not die, a hero cannot be born. Only after my death did the story truly begin. I died quickly. One knife, or several, or a single stroke of the pen. From that moment on, I was no longer a person. I became whore, poisoner, a symbol of corruption and lust. Later on, even my name became an insult, and the era that should have been examined quietly slipped into safety. Then centuries passed. Dynasties changed. City walls fell and were rebuilt. Some began to search local records, epitaphs, and historical documents. And they discovered the infamous Pan Jinlian exists only in fiction. The real me was nothing more than an ordinary woman, an ordinary marriage, a stain endlessly magnified. If you ask me whether I hate it, I do not. Because hatred cannot change how one is written. I only want to tell you this. The Pan Jinlian you hate was never me.